Okay, so good evening. We will now start this session on the role of local investors in mobilizing additional climate finance. First of all, welcome and thank you very much for having the opportunity to moderate this session. Also, thanks a lot for coming, following the invitation, and thanks a lot to the Secretariat for actually managing the incredible job of, on really short notice, organizing this fantastic workshop. To introduce myself very quickly, my name is Ulf Mooslehner. I'm also a member of the Standing Committee. I also work with the UNEP Collaborating Center for Climate and Sustainable Energy Finance. And I'm with the faculty of the Frankfurt School of Finance and Management, where that center is situated. Actually, when I heard the discussion that we had so far during this conference, the forum, I was quite fascinated by those topics, and many of the topics that were discussed so far were actually or are still at the heart of the issues of our center. There's probably one project which we have just started that I really think is relevant to the general public here, and that is precisely addressing many of the issues that were identified related to the problem of combining the efforts on the public side and on the private side and trying to get the private sector integrated. And that is a project that we just started a pilot in Uganda, and it's been developed jointly by Deutsche Bank and KfW Development Bank. And the general idea is to basically have a donor-fed feed-in fund, that is a fund full of public money which is essentially used to pay a feed-in tariff for projects which produce electricity based on renewables. And if you apply for that sort of funding, for that top-up premium, it is combined with a political risk guarantee by the World Bank. So that package, and that package then is pretty much the public side, and the idea is that then the rest, the private sector, the developers and the financiers will come, and so far we see quite a lot of bids actually for this instrument, and I would love to tell you lessons learned, but actually for that you will probably have to wait for roughly a year or so, but it's just started and it's looking very interesting how that instrument is evolving, as private sector is really going to work by itself basically if that instrument is provided. In that sense, also, this session is a bit building, of course, on what we've discussed so far, but focusing a bit more on some concrete issues, focusing the topic on the role of local investors. I think that is a very important topic, and I will very briefly, with pointing at two numbers, I'll show you why I think that is important. The two numbers I'm going to show you are taken out of a report which is going to be published, which we will publish actually in 2 weeks. We do that every year. We publish global investment figures for renewable energy. And this is a graph that shows you global investment divided in two parts actually, the investment in developing countries, dark, and in developed countries, dark green, and developing countries, light green. And that shows you, first of all, that basically the show is really moving a lot in the developing countries. In the developed countries, it's larger, but sort of less stable at the moment. But the main message is that we have roughly in 2012 had $110 billion of investment in that year in developing countries. So a lot of activity happening there. Now the second figure I want to show you is not global investment, but just cross-border investment, and divided by where does the investment flow. And this is basically divided by north-north, north-south, or north-south-south flows, and so on. And there I want to point to the number for 2011. That's the last where complete figures are available. The north-south flow in that year is roughly $8 billion. So that $8 billion is the north-south flow, and if you remember, that was roughly $110 billion of investment in developing countries. That automatically means a lot of the investment happening there is actually sourced by investors in the south. Might not be the identical country, but a lot of stuff is happening there, and the sources are there. And that's why that topic is really relevant. And I think that's reason enough to a bit move into that. And I would like to discuss with the panel this general issue, and like to discuss it at hand of sort of two guiding questions. So I'm not going to formulate individual questions now for each panelist. And I'd love if also the auditorium, you all could contribute to that discussion. And basically, if we, the two guiding questions would be, like, if the potential is so huge in developing countries, what could be typical comparative advantages of local investors? Are there comparative advantages? If so, which would be the comparative advantages of local investors? And the second part, a bit related to that, a wider discussion, if there is specific strengths of the local investors, what could the international community, perhaps most notably that Green Climate Fund that is just designed, what could policy or international policy do to precisely strengthen those comparative advantages of the local investors? And with that, I'm very happy to now introduce you to the very distinguished panel I see gathered here on the stage. I'll just start by introducing from my side on, that's Konrad von Ritter, independent, but you'll soon hear what he has to say. There's Diane, also a member of the Standing Committee, you've seen her already. Dirk Forster of IETA, CEO of IETA. Behind Jessica Parker from Findeter. And you will see in the program, Kwame will not be available, but someone else from Standard Bank, Fenella Awan, also from Standard Bank. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. And Konrad, you have the floor. Or Diane, you have the floor.
Thank you. The mic is on. Can you hear? Yes. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And my name is Diane Blacklane. I'm co-chair for the Standing Committee on Finance, but I'm not here in that capacity. Mr. Conran Van Witt and I wrote a paper, and our paper is a proposal to the Green Climate Fund to look at crowdfunding and microfinancing for climate change. Our paper is called A New Source of Finance for Climate Change Action. At the base of the pyramid, we have copies of, it's still in draft, but copies are here. And the full proposal is available as a PowerPoint presentation on the UNFCCC website and as a draft. And we would like to thank the ECBI, the European Capacity Building Initiative, for their assistance with this paper. The key message of the proposal is that climate finance needs to reach the urban and rural poor, sometimes referred to as the base of the pyramid. And that the instruments currently under discussions at the GCF or even at the GEF level currently is unlikely to reach them in any significant extent. And we're talking here about opportunities for both borrowers and investors from north-south, south-south, and maybe even south-north. We'll see. The climate action at the base of the pyramid is of critical importance for at least 3 reasons. One, there's climate justice. The base of the pyramid is mostly affected by climate change, and they would need the financing to help them to invest and to adapt. The base of the pyramid has huge mitigation potential. One presenter this morning mentioned it's very difficult to exchange certain technology in African countries because kerosene is so cheap and it's subsidized. So there's huge potential for mitigation and for climate policy advocacy. Before you can trade out kerosene oil, you have to replace it with something else that has a comparative cost. If the base of the pyramid see that their actions are linked with tangible livelihood improvement, access to clean energy, reliable urban transportation, and efficient lighting, for example, then we could get them to start investing in clean technology. There are many barriers to investing in climate change, especially at that level. One is the lack of access to finance and credit. In developing countries, this is a real problem. In developed countries, we have more capital, and in developing countries, we don't have enough to lend out. The relatively high cost of climate technology and enabling national environment to finance. For example, for clean energy solutions, we save money during life cycle, but have higher upfront costs. This is solar panels, lighting, etc. With respect to the national enabling environment, this was spoken to many times today and alluded to sometime in developing countries, the risks are very high. We believe that enabling environments can be created to reduce those risks. Our concrete proposal is that the GCF and other international climate finance institutions, including the GEF as well, should support the growth of a complementary climate finance stream to the base of the pyramid. The proposal has two parts. It's strengthening the financial institution, which has proven to be cost-effective to reach the base of the pyramid, microfinancing and SME finance. For example, Antigua and Barbuda is establishing a national enabling entity that is going to facilitate this. It's been approved by it's going to be established with the assistance of the GEF, and the Special Climate Change Fund will establish the initial capitalization to lend for micro borrowers. 2, we can support the growth of a new source of private funding, crowdfunding, and foster its expansion in support of climate action at the base of the pyramid. So Conrad will explain the details of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I suggest I explain this idea about crowdfunding best with a concrete example. So here we have Pedro Luis. He is actually from Colombia, from Barranquilla. He needs a loan of $300 to purchase an energy-efficient refrigerator and put in a fresh lighting. One of you may actually just go to your laptop and go to a website called Kiva, and you find that loan request up there, posted by the microfinance organization which is serving Pedro Luis. And you say, that is something good. I want to lend some money. So you give probably 100. Somebody else here gives 50, and then another 150. So we have the $300 together. Through Kiva, which is so-called crowdfunding platform, it's passed on to the microfinance organization, goes to Pedro Luis. Over the next 10 months, he will pay it back. His livelihood has improved because he will be saving energy. You have your money back. And so just this one crowdfunding platform has managed over the last 4 or 5 years to mobilize about 1 million lenders like you, myself, and served almost 1 million micro borrowers, channeling $400 million in that way. So these results somehow inspired us to think, couldn't we mobilize that potential for climate change action at the base of the pyramid? Because what we noticed is that these crowdfunding platforms only to a very limited extent focus actually on climate mitigation or adaptation. And so we know the situation. Non-Annex 1 need climate finance. Annex 1 is expected to provide it. And so there are formal discussion, government to government, large private sector to large private sector. GCF has been set up to ensure that this reaches amounts like 100 billion. Very little, this is our assumption, of that funding will actually trickle down directly to base of the pyramid. And that's why we are suggesting to use and to develop a complementary climate finance stream to serve the base of the pyramid and to use as one of the sources crowdfunding. And we feel that the GCF could actually create under its private sector facility a micro and crowdfunding window, could be a global sub-program, which would on the one hand support enabling actions such as Diane just described for the financing mechanisms in the country to reach the base of the pyramid, but it could also, through de-risking, for example, loss facilities for investors in crowdfunding, or through matching grants, which would magnify the impact of the crowdfunding investor and thereby increase the overall stream and help direct it towards climate mitigation and adaptation. And we feel there is a potential to actually generate a quite substantial complementary finance stream. Very well to be understood, this is not replacing the very important formal discussion, but we feel there's a need for complementarity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very innovative approach. I like thinking about that. I suggest we sort of do as most of the previous panels and just go the round and discuss at the very end. So, Dirk?
Am I up next?
You have the floor.
Well, first of all, thanks to the Standing Committee for hosting this forum, and I hope you do more of this, because I think the conversation between public and private needs to happen a lot more in this space to ensure that we actually start to get something done in this space. And I think, I guess what I wanted to focus my remarks on a little bit was more the last of your questions, I think, Ulf, around private sector views of the GCF and what might it accomplish. And from the developing country perspective, AIDA, I should say, my organization does have members from both developed and developing countries, one of whom is going to speak after me, and I'll modify my remarks to reflect whatever you say, just to make sure that we're on the same page. But I guess the way I think about this is, what do I really think that developing country investors, local investors, think about the Green Climate Fund right now? And I think they probably don't think about it very much. I think they don't see any money in it. I think they don't see any business plan for it. They don't see that it actually wants to invest in anything. So they'd rather spend their time doing something that they could really make money on tomorrow. So this thing is like a hypothetical. Could it grow into something that would interest them? Possibly. But I do think that in thinking about what would it take for the Green Climate Fund to actually stimulate that interest, I think you have to think about meeting them where they are and pulling them into sort of new investment frameworks. So I'm going to speak a little bit about at least my vantage point on that. And as a CEO of AIDA, I get to travel around the world and talk to a lot of people that are in markets or thinking about markets or thinking about climate investment. And I think I know what makes them tick, although I learn something new just about every week or every month. I'm also going to be speaking, though, from my prior life in working at NatSource, which is a company that ran carbon funds and is now in the process of winding down because, to be honest, they couldn't figure out what to invest in next. So the owners decided, at least for now, they would take their capital off of the table and wait until they saw something that they thought made sense, which is why I now work at AIDA. In that prior life, we actually were successful in raising about $1 billion worth of funds to invest in CDM projects and bring them to market in Europe or Japan or other parts of the world. At the time we had those commitments, most of it was committed to invest in offtake agreements, so buying the carbon credits at the back end. So whenever I think about what climate finance is and what a structure like the GCF might do, I generally think I've thought about the climate finance as being the challenge that the local developer had when we had given them a perfectly good ERPA, a perfectly good offtake agreement for their credits, but they still had a problem in arranging the debt and equity to make the project work, or in finding insurance products or whatever. So it was a great day when large banks got interested in the space, so that all of a sudden there was an interest in the likes of Standard Bank in offering some of those products, or even in Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, et cetera. But I'm thinking back to the period where I was running around India talking to local banks about projects, interests that we had there. And one of the questions that we got in the early days of the CDM was, you want us to invest in this project idea. You'll do the offtake, but you want us to invest in, take on some risk in this. Why aren't you talking to banks in London about this? Well, of course, at that time, banks in London weren't quite ready for the conversation. So why aren't you talking to banks in New York about that? And that was a challenge. The banks in New York aren't quite ready for it. But partly what they were looking for, I think, was some kind of a track record that somebody had done something, that somebody got a project approved, that somebody actually earned the return. So I think that's going to be an important thing for the GCF to be thinking about is if it wants to lure in institutions like that, it needs to have an investment model that's something they're comfortable with. It needs to recognize that currently across the banking community, I think there's skepticism about anything UN related, but certainly in climate finance, there's a knowledge that carbon markets are kind of stalled. Interestingly, I think they still like clean energy investments. So if it's branded as a clean energy investment rather than a climate investment, maybe that's something you could talk about. And I think that if there was a way to somehow tap into where carbon markets have been and utilize familiar instruments and some familiar infrastructure, that it might actually create an ability for the GCF to create something that would be of interest. One of my thoughts about this is that I hope you all get to go to Carbon Expo this week and talk to project developers and talk to financiers that are here, that are going to be in the exhibition hall. And if you haven't been to a Carbon Expo, one of the great things about it is to walk around and see who has the best gizmos of little trinkets that you can take home. So this is something from a recent carbon conference that I spoke at. That's my favorite gizmo of the year. And I don't know if anybody will have them here, but Argus was handing them out previously. So you can stop by and see if the Argus guys have them. But what it is it's got a UBS drive, common one on one end, and on the other, it's got something that will fit an iPhone or an old BlackBerry or a new BlackBerry. And so you can charge any of them as long as you can hook this thing into something. So the analogy I've got is there are a lot of people that understand the infrastructure of the CDM. The CDM, did you hear Hugh Seeley earlier today? 6,000 projects registered. We should have asked him how many of them have actually issued. I don't actually know the answer. I think it's less than 2,000 though. New Energy Finance might be here, they would know. But I think it's something less than 2,000 have issued. So that probably means that there are 3,000 or 4,000 projects in developing countries that somebody's thought hard about, somebody's done good work on, that have a measurement and verification plan that people understand, that if you could somehow figure out so that all of that infrastructure could plug into the GCF, that would be a really valuable thing. It might enable the Green Climate Fund to get a track record on projects early. Maybe they don't want all of them. Maybe not all types of them would actually be allowed to get through. But I think if I were on the Green Climate Fund board or the standing committee, I would be thinking of a way to tap into that infrastructure and have a way to convert it to a different use. And maybe the model is that you allow someone to bring a CDM project in and convert it into a Green Climate Fund project as long as it meets a certain set of criteria. And I think that might enable the Green Climate Fund to expedite its efforts. It would certainly help with the CDM market. And it might actually make the Green Climate Fund a real player that banks in developing countries would take a look at and say, yeah, I remember what the CDM was about, and if you're using these elements, maybe I know what that deal book is going to look like, and I know how to approve something like that. So that's my nugget of advice. There may be other things that the Green Climate Fund could do out of these discussions, like maybe if it had a facility that could underwrite a renewable energy feed-in tariff, that would be a very interesting thing. And I certainly like some of the ideas in this crowd financing. I think it's very innovative, and maybe there's a fit there too. So anyway, I'll stop there, but that's my remarks. Thank you, Wolf.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Jessica Jacob,
I'm going to
next.
stand up, if you don't mind.
Do you need help with the?
Let me see. It's okay.
Great.
Well, they asked me to do one slide, so this might seem like a puzzle. That's why I'm standing up, and I will explain it to you. So I'm Jessica Jacob. I represent a Colombian Development Bank. We are the Infrastructure Colombian Bank. I was before in UNEP Finance Initiative. I was the coordinator of Latin America and Africa. So I have a good perspective, I can say, from the first level banks or private banks in different development countries. And as well from my actual experience, all our clients from a development bank are private banks and first level banks. So I can explain to you how they're thinking, how they're feeling, at least in Colombia and a little bit as well in Latin America. So I was thinking to focus on challenges because opportunities are always very easy to say, but then to realize it's a little bit as well complicated. So about challenges in first level banks, I will say the first big challenge is for you to understand the importance of the role of the financial institutions. Like we have to be in their shoes, like, well, I bet Marley was in that kind of shoes, like saying long-term for a private bank or a first-level bank is quite hard to think, and even more in this stage of level. Like we have to start thinking how they think. We have to not just criticize banks or ask them for more, but be in their place and to think that they are not made to, to change the world. They are placed, they have that kind of jobs because they are just looking for utilities and for money. So we have to understand that, and that's not bad. They're moving the world, and we depend on them, and that's why these kind of issues of financial institutions are so important in this kind of moments of international negotiation. So what more have the private levels, well, the first level banks or the private banks as challenges? They are in a lack of information that you cannot imagine. Like even they don't know what is adaptation, what is mitigation. Like in my case, for example, in a second level bank or development or public bank, they are called differently in each part of the world, we have to go and train the first level banks. There are other like multilateral agencies like IADB, like CAF, that in Latin America are helping a lot, and they just don't arrive with a credit. They go with the technical support, with training, and that's one of the most important things to do in the private banks if you want them to get involved in this environmental or climate change world. So one of the biggest legs, I will say, is training, capacity building, and as well to link the different actors like private banks, public banks, governments, multilateral agencies, United Nations. So I bring now an example to show you what are we doing in Colombia to go ahead these challenges for the first and second level banks. So in that case, when I was before in UNEP, we created and we copied an example from Brazil that's named the Green Protocol. And what is the idea of this volunteer protocol? It was signed in Colombia last year by the President of the Republic and the President of the Banking Association and 12 presidents from banks that you can see up here. So these are the members of the Green Protocol. And we gather each month in 3 different tables with the first level banks, with the international banks, with the development banks, to speak about 3 main subjects. The first one is the typical eco-efficiency, and how do you manage your resources inside your offices or buildings. The second one, and I would say the most important, is how to implement systems within the banks to manage and identify environmental social risk. That's one of the most difficult tasks for a bank. But if you're hoping banks to invest, I would say first you have them to understand the risk. If they don't understand the risk, they will not understand opportunities, or they will not understand the good opportunities, so the good way of seeing an opportunity, not just an opportunity of greenwash or marketing. You have to show them where are the risks, and then by ourselves in the banks, we will discover the opportunities. But sometimes we're just too much focusing. Banks have money, and let's go and ask for that, but we are not thinking what do we have to improve in those bankers so they can understand our language. So that's why we created this Green Protocol. And so we have the government, we have the Banking Association that is leading the protocol, we have international banks, we have, for example, 3 microfinance banks. Banco Procredit, you all know them. Banca Mia is the biggest microfinance institution in Colombia. Finamérica, it goes only to the poorest of the poorest, but you have as well, Findeter, my bank, that's a development bank. Bancoldex as well is a development bank. So you have all different actors, and we are really working together between us, sharing good experience, seeing with different actors what we really can do within the bank to then go and explore other opportunities. And you can see that this effort was supported by different organizations. I even think that a lot of you work over there, you don't even know that you participated in a way in this Green Protocol. So it's good to know that this kind of collaboration can help a lot in a country, and it wasn't nothing else that, for example, just correcting the green protocol at the moment that was before going to be launched. That's a big effort, for a country, and that when we have this help from other organizations that have a really good experience, they can translate it into banking, and then we can translate it into international language. So that's my first example. I'm going to pass to the second one because I only have 2 minutes left. And just to show you a little bit, so we are members of UNEP-FI, the Global Compact, this green protocol that has a logo already and is being quite known in Latin America. International Conservancy, we are launching our first sustainability report this year, and we work a lot with IADB, who I really have to help. Thanks for all their help. And my second point that I think is the most important is the role of development banks. Like sometimes we always think about the first level banks, but we don't even know that there are public or second level banks that, in our case, for example, all the private banks and the first level banks are our clients. So we are like a multiplier effect to all these banks because we have to train them on risk. We show them the different opportunities. We either, for example, we have actually, in Finland, there are 2 lines, like financial lines, what you're looking for. One is an adaptation, and we have $500 million. And we have another in mitigation, a lot of money as well. But at the end, the first level banks, they don't even come to us for this really cheap money because they don't know what is adaptation. They don't know what is mitigation. So we have already put on the market some kind of mechanism to develop the environmental market, but the first level banks, they don't understand for the moment. And that's why with this green protocol and with help of different organizations, we are really trying to get to these banks because we know that they have a really important role, but we cannot just hope them to understand what we understand in this kind of room. We have to really teach them, and I don't think that's hopeless to work with this kind of bankers because sometimes we say, look, they will never understand. I think that even the worst banker in the world has the human and the environmental side. You just have to know how to get it out. And how? I would say you have to sell it like you're going to find money, you're going to open your market, you're going to, you're going to have new clients, you're going to advise as well your clients, and you're going to give better services. So I really encourage you to think more on the role of the development banks, because as you see in this figure, we know what's happening in the international sphere, but we even know more what's happening in the local sphere. We're working in, for example, in our case, in 58 municipalities in the country, in 300 cities all around. We know if the market is ready for renewable energy or not. In Colombia's case, I would say, no, it's energy efficiency, like you have to go step by step. And sometimes things are moving very fast in the international sphere are not going to be at the same speed in the local sphere. So you really have to get more involved with local actors because they really know which are the ambitions of the different markets, if there's already or not funding, because in our case, for example, we're not looking for funding all around the world. We have our own funding, so we're just looking to develop the market, and we need this kind of experts around the room to come to Colombia and to Latin America to give us your knowledge and to share it with the private sector so they can really invest and get in the same mood that we are and understand the same language. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jessica, for a quite informative slide and, and your story around that. I'll directly pass on to Fenella. Would you like to be taught by Findata?
I was going to say, is this the point where I say I'm a private banker and am I looking for capacity building? I think probably I'll be looking for some guarantees and some funding, but the capacity building may be a little bit to wait. Okay, thank you very much, Ulf. And please excuse me, my notes are a little bit all over the place. I was asked to kind of step in at lunchtime. So I've heard some really interesting things so far. I think, Dirk, your comments about what is the GCF, just quickly thinking about that, it's rather like the British summer. We know it's on the way, but we're not holding our breath for it. So rather like that. I think probably from our point of view, Standard Bank is the largest African bank, mainly based in sub-Saharan Africa. We are obviously seen as very active in this area. We're working a lot in project finance and in the carbon finance space. I think it's quite worthwhile just to speak about some of our experiences, as Ulf has asked me to, of being a bank on the ground, actually based in countries. We are based in 17 sub-Saharan African countries and expanding all the time. Finance is split into two things, and it's worthwhile looking at that from comments that have been said so far. There's project finance, and then there's carbon finance. Now, you can describe the two of those together as climate finance if it's a green project, or you may wish not to. But it's fairly easy. Carlos Fuller from the Caribbean made a comment earlier on his solar-powered desalination plant. It made economic sense. Project finance generally looks for projects that make economic sense. Where we're challenged on the ground, and my colleague who was going to speak here, Kwame, is based in Nairobi, and he and I often have conversations between London and Nairobi, where he's saying, look, I just can't make it make economic sense. The numbers aren't adding up. The feed-in tariff isn't high enough compared with the cost of what it's going to cost to build it, or the project owner wants to retain too much equity or something. You know, can you do something on the carbon side? So we would historically, a few years ago, be looking at, okay, the carbon is worth this much. Is the project actually going to happen and be built? And that's the point of implementation I'll cover. If it is, then yes, we can look at an ERPA and look at pre-financing the ERPA. It worked in a few cases. I wouldn't say it was a roaring success, and there are 600 renewable energy projects in Kenya, just because there aren't 600 renewable energy projects in East Africa. But that was the theory. Now the carbon price has gone. So what are the problems facing these projects? And I think as well, you have to divide to what type of project is it? Are we talking about a renewable energy project where it's just a wind farm or a solar park that actually has an income stream because it's selling electricity, so it's got something to pay back the money? So whether it's your crowd financing or whether it's a bank, we're a bank, we want our money back, unfortunately. We don't give it away. We have shareholders, we lend it, we need it to come back. So that means there has to be an income stream generated by any project, irrelevant of what it does. So it's much easier to look at that on a renewable energy project that has electricity as the source of income. But what is the income stream from someone being given a cook stove? Historically, there was a fantastic carbon credit income because there were carbon credits attributed to giving that cook stove away. But should we say, okay, fine, abandon it, abandon all the CDM projects? And I think this probably covers your point as well. We still know it's a good idea to give somebody an efficient cook stove, or at least to charge them a multiplied subsidised price for it, against having them still using kerosene, whether that's a health benefit, whether that's the greenhouse gas mitigation benefit, etc. Now quantify it. If you can quantify it, it can be valued. If it can be valued, it can be traded, and therefore it can be financed. So I'm not into the science side, I'm into the commercial side. So you guys have to do the sort of theory of it first, and as soon as it can be valued, quantified and valued, I can finance it. So I think from those are kind of the issues. The advantages of being local are really coming to the fore now when it comes to massive projects. And when I talk massive, I'm talking scale as in trying to stick 1 million solar water heaters on roofs of low-cost housing in South Africa. You can't do that if you're going to fly in with a suitcase, do a bit of banking for a couple of days and then fly home again. It just doesn't work. because there is an enormous amount of cost, unseen costs of implementing projects, whether that is choosing the right company that's going to take the data, because 6 of the companies that are installing the solar water heaters actually only have handwritten records. Nothing is on computer. So you've got to find the right software company to then put it onto computer before you've even got the records for the monitoring to then work out how many carbon credits or how many good things they've done. So all of this costs an enormous amount of money that is hidden money, that quite a lot of these CDM projects that have stalled because there is a point where there's just no economic worth, it's not worthwhile putting out this money to bother monitoring at a price of 50 cents. So the GCF, in our minds, would do very well to view a project as, we know it's good, what's good about it, what's it doing that we like, now let's quantify that. If it is benefiting that country because there is less strain on the health system, then we channel funding through that local government to the end project. And I would say be wary about this, and I apologise, Jessica, but I only apologise a little bit because you did tell me I needed capacity building and training.
it depends.
So,
which developing country we're speaking. South Africa is quite different of
that's true.
Latin America.
The triangle, the pyramid that Jessica showed we're starting at the international fund, which I assume that GCF, and every time I see a triangle sort of with lines like that, I always think of Maslow's hierarchy. I don't know if anyone did it in fact, but self-actualization is up there with the GCF, clearly. And I noticed that private banks are just above food and shelter. We're clearly not very high. There's a big chunk in the middle, and I have to say, and I respect that an enormous amount of that large chunk is sitting in the audience today. Can we just make it a little bit thinner? Because it takes too long. What do you want? A 4% rise in temperature before we can actually get the money out to fund the project? It takes too long. We work with all the development banks. We work with local governments in Africa. It takes a very, very long time to get money out. It is brilliant work that people are doing, and some of the systems and some of the programs that have been set up, for example, small renewable energy projects with backup wholesale guarantees through ADB have worked fantastically in Nairobi and have allowed us to finance 5-megawatt projects, because a 100-megawatt project takes the same due diligence as a 5-megawatt. So we can lighten that due diligence if we have this underlying guarantee. So that has helped enormously and has allowed us to finance projects we wouldn't otherwise finance. But our due diligence and everything else took a few months to actually get the funding. After we were told the program was ready, to actually get it issued took over a year. So in theory, it was ready to give us, but it wasn't quite ready. So I think that we can clearly, a government, it's very difficult, and this we found when we were trying to help the Mauritian government, and we worked very closely with Jeff there in Mauritius to try and send, to do a rollout of solar water heaters. The government couldn't deal with a private company directly. It wasn't, they weren't allowed. And therefore, we do need intermediaries. We need some level of development bank, is very true, to allow governments to be seen as impartial and not favouring, or there's a tender process. It's a simple route. But once it's gone through one level, I think that's probably it. I'm timed out.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to. That's all very, very interesting. And first of all, thanks a lot for that insight. I'd like to open the discussion, which I think is very interesting, to the general audience as quickly as possible. I'll also collect like 2 questions, but I would be eager to shoot my 2 questions first. But I'll also collect the others. I'm just eager to come a bit back to my general questions, and that perhaps just be very concrete. If any of you on the panel together with other questions, could react to the questions. Do you think that the local institutions feel less of the political risk that is so often quoted as being a showstopper for the investment? Do you think that local investors sometimes feel less of that risk? And might that, because I haven't really heard, you've pointed to some of the comparative advantages, but I haven't heard very many fundamental advantages that we should look at. So that as a general question, but I'd be eager now to collect from the auditorium. Who would have questions? I see back there and then here, Raymond.
Tom. Hi, Killian Wenthrop from Perspectives Climate Change. I want to start with a quick comment and then a question. I'd strongly agree with what Dirk said about trying to utilize the CDM architecture as much as possible for the GCF as a way of, I guess, keeping the the intellectual content, the mechanism, how it works. It worked pretty well, trying to use some of those elements as best as possible. But maybe hearing a CDM consultant saying that isn't so surprising. And I guess the question then is for Fenella. You alluded to, I guess, the fact that maybe the CDM wasn't such a roaring success in sub-Saharan Africa, and that it did result in some things happening, but not very much perhaps. And I guess the question then is, to what extent would you prefer to see people coming to you asking you to invest in things which are utilizing that CDM architecture and infrastructure going forward, for example, for channeling funding through the GCF, versus coming up with something new? And I guess this is an admittedly loaded question, and I'm hoping for an answer there. But I'm really interested in your thoughts and where there is room for improvement. Where do you see that? Thanks.
Raymond.
Thank you. I found the presentation on the crowd financing interesting. I missed part of it, though. I'm sorry for not being here when you started. But I don't know if you, how far your thoughts have gone in the direction of the institutional aspect of it. Coming from a background of working locally, I started seeing things, some comparisons, I think, for instance, with the Jeff Small Grants program. In that program is like a decentralized program working in countries, so that you have this a structure where there is a global structure, but there is also a structure in the country that could mobilize these the funds. So I was interested to see where your thoughts have gone in operationalizing this concept. Thank you.
I suggest we go now for those questions. Would you like to start, and then we move along?
Okay. Thank you very much. And indeed, the idea to reach the base of the pyramid is absolutely not a new idea, fortunately. But obviously, we haven't really sort of cracked the nut with big success, so that's why we need to continue searching. The difference I would see to the GF small-scale program is that in its essence, crowdfunding for climate change actually happens between, if you want, a private initiative on the one side and microfinance and a private initiative on the other side, which does not involve some of the approval processes, some of the strategic policy direction which come if you have a publicly funded program. Having said this, obviously we have advocated that public resources would be used to foster something which is sort of emerging there and direct it or encourage it to go in the direction of climate finance. In our paper, we actually warn that one needs to be careful in that process of fostering these relatively nimble process, which can be very fast, so that by the good intention of the public sector to support, you don't sort of squeeze the baby to death because you pile on whatever safeguards and reporting requirements, etc. So that is a balancing act, but it's very clear, that such a complementary finance stream would have a public good function and hence would have a rationale for public support. And secondly, that it faces risks which I think could effectively be reduced through such public intervention.
Thanks. Yes? Yeah.
Yeah, microfinancing can go from the consumer level. We're talking at the level of the consumer, the base of the pyramid. These are the ones that are borrowing for energy efficient refrigerator and others. But it can, in many countries, it will be a little bit bigger than 500 or 1,000. It can go up to $10,000 US. We're making our argument in the paper that it can go up to 10,000, a million, even 10 million in certain countries if the crowd financiers have the backing of the GCF. And when we mean backing of the GCF, it means that risk reduction, and in some cases, subsidy of the technology. And, like Conrad is saying, that would have to be done at the same speed. There's no sense the GCF get involved, and I agree with you, unless they can facilitate this at the same speed as it's happening right now. So we're going to take that effort that is happening right now and bring it into the climate sphere. And we have to be careful with that. And the one way we suggest that could happen if you have national entities that will take those risks away and facilitate that process, that private sector to private sector lending, without sacrificing speed and agility of this process. And we think that for a very small amount of money, the GCF can get this up and running, because it's happening already. It's just redirecting it somewhere for a very small amount of effort and a small amount of money to get it up and running and off. Because we have the concern that you have, of course, is that once the UN and the development banks and the JEF and everybody, you get project cycles over 2 years, and the private sector is not going to be there after 2 years.
Yeah, thanks. There was other parts of the question open. I suggest we go on with the round. Some of the questions aspects were directly. If you want, you can also. I would urge you to be brief, because I would like to take another quick round of questions. If you also feel urgent drivers to directly react to what has been said, feel free to sort of also get a discussion among us going. But we'll continue, and you can think about good questions. Go ahead.
Well, there was a question for Fenella.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Just to answer the question from perspectives, I wouldn't want to say, it's not that the CDM was not successful, it was the CDM was successful too late in Africa. And what we have to remember is the environment we're trading in. Not only do we have this sort of panic that the market, that the that the temperature of the world is going up, we've also got the market prices are moving all the time, whether that's an exchange rate, a carbon price, or something else. As a dear friend of mine, an East End trader, once told a client on the phone, they're not door numbers. So you've got to make sure that we can trade quick enough. And Africa was just too late. The market fell before we could get true traction. Also, there's just less people in Africa. That's the reason you're going to have less coal-fired power stations to do energy efficiency on, less wind farms, less everything else. So that's going to remain always the case. But do I think it's going to channel into something new? God, I hope not. I think really, let's not reinvent the wheel, really. We've worked so hard to actually try and understand every single nuance of this incredibly complex system. If anything, I would just like some of the rules removed. We were actually discussing over lunchtime, why don't we just get rid of additionality? Or something, just get rid of some of the rules, if anything, especially some of the ones that I think were made on a very theoretical basis about reporting and monitoring that really are very difficult to actually implement. Now, with that, you have to then add on to what my other comment was, which was the carbon price is worth nothing. So if we just keep the status quo, we keep on carbon, we keep on doing everything, then all we're doing is we're the first signs of madness. What is it? Still just keep doing the same thing again and again and expect a different result. So if there's not going to be a miracle of the price, if we cannot change the supply and demand dynamics quick enough, the price is going to stay here of carbon, at which point we have to look at something else. And that's the other bit of good. And if we have another bit of good, which is either the health benefits, so a reduction on the healthcare system, or something else, then you do have to have another level. And I would say you would have to be quite harsh about it. This isn't an essay written in a sort of nice, very gentle, holistic way. This is hard and fast statistics that can be traded on, that the GCF or another body could look at and go, right, that's the number. Yes, that's worth putting in to that African country. I will get that money back because that African country will pay me back because they will need to spend less on healthcare in the next 5 or 10 years. Because everybody wants their money back, really, at the end of it. So they will get the money back that route, which is too long an investment for commercial banks.
Thanks. You had a question, and then Stefan, and then you in the front.
First of all, I want to make a comment on what you were saying, your original question, that if there was a competitive advantage for local investors. At least in Latin America as a region, what you find is that we have gone through several financial crises. And people know, the problems associated with currency mismatches. And therefore, one of the things that is becoming increasingly important in the region is to try to finance whatever you're going to finance in local currency if possible. And this is one of the big challenges that many of these international climate funds have had in the region, because basically those are loans in dollars. Even though they are concessional, they are in dollars, long-term, and in Latin America, no one dares, to forecast what will happen in 15, 20 years' time, okay? That's a big issue that has to be bear in mind, even in the conception of these new financial mechanisms that is going to be put in place, the Green Climate Fund. The second thing, and that may explain a lot of what you were showing in your charts about developing countries, at least in the Latin American context, is that you are seeing a growing integration of several countries that have been very successful in managing, the macroeconomic and financial issues. I'm thinking about Mexico, Peru, Chile, and Colombia. And they are even creating a whole alliance now, a Pacific alliance, and they are integrating even further. And what has been happening over the years, because they have been fairly stable, is that their local pension funds have grown dramatically, And as part of the regulations associated with those pension funds, some of the monies, they have to take them out of the country and try, to look for attractive investments in the region. And what has been happening is that many institutional investors have started to buy positions in other countries, within these 4 countries, so that, and they are building up stakes, in those local markets. You have a diversification that is of investments, opportunities, that is increasing the integration of all those countries in their economic and business ventures.
Thank you very much.
And, yeah.
No, thank you very much.
No, the last thing I wanted, and this is perhaps I didn't understand properly, is about your comment, Pamela, about intermediation. Because you say it's too much intermediation. My question to you is, how do you handle small and medium enterprises, okay? Because I can understand, if you have large projects, it will be very easy. But when you start to work, with small and medium enterprises, which are the majority of the enterprises in many of these developing countries, how are you going to do that without some intermediation? I mean, perhaps I didn't understand you properly in your comment.
Can we just collect the questions and then go for? Sorry, that was Stefan, and then you in the front.
Yeah, Stefan Anier from the EU Commission. I have a question for Jessica on FinDeter. I'd be interested whether you work mostly at project level with other banks, or I think this is the way forward, capacity building, basically to integrate adaptation or mitigation into a project design, or whether you also work with the government that works on the overall strategies for mitigation and adaptation, and whether you look at different financing instruments and tools that can be used to implement these strategies at a more sectoral level or even national level. Thank you.
Thanks. And then you, and if there's no burning last question, I would then say we
Yeah, thank you.
We
One
answer.
comment and one clarification. In case of Asia, so as far as I know, the many emerging economy, the finance sector is growing. For instance, Thailand or Malaysia. So even though the long-term financing project can be covered by the local finance. For just one case I'd let you know here is solar power generation in Thailand. The first project was initiated and developed and funded by Asian Development Bank. But the second, third, fourth, later, all of them are funded by the Thai local finance. The local finance, including a pension fund, had a lot of money. So I think when we are talking about the GCF, in that case, the combination with the local finance, that is one of the best way. And my question is to Konrad. So the microfinance, that is a really interesting one and quite new for me. But when you are going to use the money at the Green Climate Fund, so I think the microfinance is not easy to implement it simply. So I'm afraid that GCF can handle microfinance directly or not. That is my question. But you said the GCF is expected to be a matching fund. If my understanding is correct, you are expecting to have an intermediary between the microfinance and the GCF. Is my understanding correct?
So, thank you very much. Whether public or private, we all don't want to mess with the minister, and he's already here, so we better finish up very quickly now. So there were some direct questions. I would urge you to very quickly, but very briefly answer the questions. I think there was the first one was directly to.
Okay.
To
Jessica, you had one? Do you
I
wanna-
think to.
Okay. The intermediation, just very quickly on that point, SMEs. The private banks deal with the SMEs. So it's not, there is a point where it gets too small, then we tend to aggregate and work through another company to deal with very small. So that would be, for example, crowdfunding would solve that problem. We can't deal with Pedro because he's an individual too small. So a crowdfunding solution would answer that. And that's that. So we do deal, the banks, that's why we have retail bank offices spread across the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, dealing with individuals and small companies.
Thanks. Jessica.
Okay, so thank you for that question, and very useful because I forgot part of my presentation. And one thing that was very interesting in Colombia is that for 2 years, the government, so the Ministry of Finance, well, all the important departments of the government, created something called Finance Committee for Climate Change. And there was neither a development bank or a first level bank. So when I arrived there 2 years later, so beginning of this year, my first question, like, why and how are you speaking about finance mechanism and how to arrive to the beneficiaries, etc., if you're not speaking to banks? You're speaking about finance, you're not getting involved banks. So what's the first reaction, and one of the results of that, discussion with the government, it was like they didn't even know that this green protocol existed because it's the Ministry of Environment who's really like giving, the right and doing actions. And so now what we're trying to do is to do an agreement between the Green Protocol, where all the private banks are, and this government agency that are, talking about climate change, adaptation, red, carbon, and all that they don't really understood. Banks didn't understood what was happening, and now we're getting together the actors so we can really go ahead and look to the different mechanisms. And going very fast, like the second way that we could prove that we're working with the government, actually, FinDeter is building a NAMA on energy efficiency in public lighting, and we're working with all the different actors of the either the private or the public sector to take this finance line as a NAMA that I think is going to be one of the first experience for a development bank like this. And that's another way to prove that we're really in Colombia working between the different actors. And I think it's a really good example to try to follow. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Konrad, I think you're the last one. And try
Thank
not
you
to
very
miss.
much. Excellent question. Very clear answer. Our expectation is not that GCF in any way would get involved firsthand in something like microfinance or crowdfunding. Both are essentially local activities, and hence they need to be in those hands. What we are thinking about, systemic risks which are there as these institutions move into a mitigation and adaptation project, which they are not familiar with, to reduce and buy down that risk initially with a clear exit strategy that once the business case is developed, those support mechanisms can be reduced. This is where we see the role, and yeah, thank you.
Okay. So I'd like to thank all of you very much. I think it was a very good discussion. Also, thank you very much to you for the good questions. Thanks a lot.
Great. Well, nice panel you brought together.